Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Sean, for the introduction. Thank you, Joe, for the invitation to MacGill. And ladies and gentlemen, as Sean introduced me, I tend to use data like a drunk uses a lamppost, more for support than illumination. So I'm going to use a lot of numbers probably. But what I want to really say, I suppose, just to set it out, is I believe that the economy is at a particularly golden age for Ireland. And I want to offer the following proposition. Some place on earth has to be the wealthiest place on earth. I believe that the conditions are right for Ireland right now to be that place, and I believe we're well on our way to being that place. And that has a mindset change that's going to be required to handle what is, in my view, one of the greatest resource boons that a society has ever encountered. And that Ireland, my argument to make this morning is Ireland has found the modern day equivalent of oil. And the modern day equivalent of oil is intellectual property as embedded in corporate balance sheets, and that ecosystem that can be built around that can be both sustainable, renewable, and to propel this society to being the richest part of the world. Now, for inconvenient truth purposes, any 10-year-old Googling a country like Ireland for a school project will find in the current IMF GDP per capita with purchasing power parity, Ireland is number 4 in the world. The countries that are around it on that list will be Luxembourg, Brunei, and Qatar. So that's a very inconvenient place for an austerity obsessed narrative and country. And the arguments behind this, I believe, is very heavily driven by the business model, which I would contend is a model of substance. And I'm going to just maybe labor on that word substance for a moment and encourage us to think a little bit more about the macroeconomy, which I know the session's about, but I would like to frame it in the context of what I think is a paradigm shift from Ireland being a regular small open economy that's been well discussed here at MacGill over the years to one that's now handling a resource economy and some of the dangers of that. So it's the equivalent of a family winning a lottery but not being smart enough to put down the roots for future generations and actually splurging quite a lot. And I would contend that there's a huge amount of conspicuous consumption going on, but surprisingly, that consumption figure doesn't appear to be in the national accounts. We're looking at volume growth of about 1.5% or so on the consumption part from households. Anybody standing outside with a box outside a Tesco would be able to assess that that's not the actual growth in the consumer behaviour in Ireland. Irish households are growing disposable income, again officially, at 5% disposable income growth for the last 3 years on one of the highest levels of household income in the globe already. The households in Ireland themselves have self-reported through the Household Budget Survey what their incomes are, and so again, if you take a look at that, on average, the average Irish household has over 1,100 euros a week disposable income, nearly 60,000 euros a year. That puts us into the Qatar, not quite Luxembourg, but certainly up there. So the base on which we're operating would have come very firmly from an economy that had a shock, went through the hard yards of regaining competitiveness, the unit labour costs were transformed, and was done so against the backdrop from what I see in my day job as the most transformative capital stock change in a very dramatic way in terms of the type of industries we have here. But the bit I want to maybe, in terms of added value, bring, or at least prompt a discussion on, is in addition to that hard yards and coming back as we did through regular, good quality of productivity growth where we combine skill capital with a really modern infrastructure, because one of the advantages that I would contend that makes conditions for Ireland to be the richest place right now is we don't have a legacy of industrialisation to deal with that other societies have. So we were very much greenfield in many ways. We weren't dealing with post-industrialisation, social issues. We actually jumped into modernity very quickly, and I would contend, in the last few minutes I have here, I would contend that in the last 5 years, we've jumped into an even further phase where I contend that Ireland is now a frontier economy in a modern age. So let me just take that last piece first. What do I mean by this? What's the frontier? 10 years ago, if you looked at the top 10 companies in the world in the Forbes top 10, 4 of them would be oil and gas companies. Today, there are none. So this kind of tangible oil idea has been replaced by intangible assets embedded in corporations like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, and so on, which now dominate the top 10. If you look at those corporate balance sheets, they have no or little or no physical assets. Their assets and the valuation is driven by the intellectual property and the brands that lie within those balance sheets. And a substantial part of the Irish economy is now driven and reflected by that type of intellectual property. And I want to make something to say where we find ourselves is that the GDP numbers that everybody's running away from, I believe, are real. So 2015, the Irish economy did not grow by just 26%. That's volume. Economists talk about the volume growth. Real people live in a cash world. The Irish economy grew by 34% in 2015. So that real or not real? Did your income grow by 1/3 in that year? Well, the answer, I hope it did, but it's probably not. But were the Beverly Hillbillies instantaneously rich when the black oil was shooting out of the ground? No, what you've got to do is you've got to capture it, build an infrastructure around it, market it, and so on. So we're at the vanguard of this surge in this modern-day equivalent of oil. So where did it come from? Well, to be evocative, Starbucks has a very big part to play in this scenario for the Irish economy. In 2012, Starbucks were shown to be paying no corporation tax in the United Kingdom. It became a bit of a public outcry. Their reaction to that, what they did next, I would contend, changed the scenario for Ireland dramatically. What they did next at Starbucks was they gave themselves a self-administered tax amnesty. They basically wrote a check and metaphorically sent it to George Osborne for about 17 million sterling, and it kind of said there, that's a donation. They didn't say what this was based on, why they were paying it. So this egregious behavior gave rise to Cameron, Osborne, Obama, and the G20 to say, we've got to sort out this corporate taxation issue. We need to react to this world that we're living in terms of intangibility and so on. And so they got the OECD in Paris to take a look at this exercise, came under the rubric of base erosion profit shifting, but in essence is a very easy thing to say, which is substance. You must show substance where you've got your tax strategy. And so people thought that, well, that's Ireland gone, because can Ireland show any substance? But in fact, we can. We've had a huge tradition of substance built over the last 60 years in many different sectors. Don't have time this morning to go into all of those, but we had substance. What we also had was we had membership of the European Union, a common law legal system, Anglo-Saxon view of the world, and so lots of the movement to show substance to where your tax strategy was involved the movement of corporate balance sheets, mainly from the Caribbean, which couldn't show substance. And so in the lift and shift, the European Union looked like a place where there's lots of substance, 500 million people. So where do you drop when you're moving? Where do you drop into the European Union? There was just 2 choices for a lot of those companies, Britain or Ireland. Because the common law legal system is one of the distinguishing features that makes it adaptable, more quickly adaptable than codified legal systems that exist in Europe. And so when you're dealing with a new world where intangibility becomes the driving force of the balance sheets, and just to give you a concrete example of this, take Glanbia, that wonderful company Glanbia, goes from being a milk co-op, and in the year 2000, on their balance sheet, their intangible assets were just over 1 million euros, 1 million. Today, the intangible part of their balance sheet is 1.3 billion euros. That's Glanbia, substance. Infant formula, but now all the gym bunnies in the world, in terms of sports nutrients, that grass, the only natural resource we have here, which we didn't do anything with for years in terms of even their cattle just ate the grass and were exported live, no value added. That grass is now one of the big drivers of the nutrients, both in Ireland controlling quite a significant part of the infant formula market globally, and now these nutrients for the gym bunnies, as I call them. So the balance sheets are reflecting this intangibility, And so in the BEPS world of substance, what we've seen is in the year 2015 was a kind of a whale of a year, but it was already happening in 13 and 14. So companies like Accenture are now an Irish company, which means that when profits get repatriated, they get repatriated to Ireland, not out of Ireland. Ingersoll Rand, similarly, before 2015 became Irish. So in this fight between Britain and Ireland, and Sean, I should be finishing up, I presume, this fight between Britain and Ireland, just to give you one example of something that didn't happen, but give you a sense of the scale. Pfizer, which is still a top 10 Forbes company, has twice in the last 6 years attempted to become European. In any other sphere of life, this will be seen as a success. If you had a team of researchers leave Philip's old alma mater of Harvard and came to Trinity, it would be a great success. When corporations, which are actually much bigger than any individual university in terms of its scale and capacity, decide to do that, there's silence or some disdain around pejorative statements like tax inversion. Well, whatever you want to call it, it's still a movement. It still comes to society, still is creating capacity to generate resource and revenue. Pfizer attempted to become British first through the AstraZeneca deal, and that was blocked by Vince Cable and the coalition part of the Lib Dems at that point, even though Osborne and Cameron were issuing press statements in the first 15 minutes of the announcement of the positivity of it. And then in 2016, Pfizer attempted to become European again by becoming Irish, by inverting through Allergan out in Westport, and Allergan are the people that make all the Botox in the world is made in Westport, and Allergan itself is an Irish company. In 2015, with the Brexit uncertainty, Britain took themselves out of the basin of attraction for these companies, leaving Ireland alone globally as a receptor for these corporate balance sheets. The corporate balance sheet in Ireland increased by 40% in the year 2015. Over 350 billion of controlled balance sheets were moved to Ireland to push our corporate balance sheet over 1 trillion euros at this point. And in November of 2015, the Department of Finance were guiding a 4.3 billion return from corporate tax revenue. On the 31st of December, when the cash was in, the 4.3 billion was actually 6.9 billion. The miss was 2.6 billion, which on a 12.5% corporation tax rate, factor of 8, is at least a miss of 20 billion of profits in addition to the companies that they knew, like Ryanair, CRH, etc. So even just tracking through the corporate tax revenue, that 6.9 became 7.6 billion in 16. Last year it became 8.3 billion, and this current run rate, it's going to be above 9, possibly even 10 billion this year. That's the royalty from the oil. Recurring, and has been recurring. Does this mean it's here forever? No, because oil can run out, the price of oil can go down, but you're dealing with a resource economy. The potential to be a game changer and to increase our infrastructure is manifest in this country. We are now, in my view, suffering from Galbraith's condition of private affluence and public squalor. And no more testament to this nouveau riche family who wins the lottery and doesn't know what to do with it can be seen by where we're letting our universities slide down the international ranking tables at a point where you're having a rich society allowing many, many elements of public infrastructure to decline. So my challenge, I suppose, to end with, is if you look at the prism of Ireland through the regular cyclical economy, that's fine. But you're missing a very significant part of the game changer that has become the corporate balance sheet for once in a generation to drive this economy even further. And when that tide goes out, this generation are going to look very foolish in what it left behind, when it had by far the biggest boon in the history of our great society, and we squandered it. So therefore, I'm for an ambitious seize the moment in our budgetary policy. I do think we should spend more, but I think we need to spend more on the infrastructure, public infrastructure for the future, and that might involve taking money off households for the future. Nobody wants to talk about higher taxes, but we've been here before. We've taken money to mind for society through SSIA type schemes. In the past, they were only for putting cash in a tin and you could take it out after 5 years. How about using that money for recurring bonds for the universities, for instance, to pump that money in to get them up the university ranking so they can charge higher fees to international students and keep attracting and pay a dividend back to society. We need to start to contend by being rich, because rich is not costless. We are now suffering, a final point, we're now suffering from these riches. They are not silent. The consequence of finding that oil, the intellectual property, and what happened in 2015 with aircraft leasing companies coming in, Medtronic became Irish and so on during that year, is that wages are being bid up very dramatically in society. Commercial rents are being driven up by those, because those who find the oil can absorb all the costs in their productivity stroke profitability. But those who have to contend in the same society have to compete for the same workers, compete for the same rents, compete for everything, but they can't get the productivity. And so they have to pass it on in higher costs. And ultimately, the danger for society is that when the tide goes out, when the oil goes out, or the corporate balance sheets move again, or whatever might happen, you're left with a stranded and uncompetitive economy. My view is that we've never seen the loss of competitiveness happen as quickly in a society as currently is happening in Ireland. And I also believe the most reflective part of that is people are withdrawing their labour because they have enough money. The airport in Dublin, to finish with, is now near capacity. It is 32 million capacity driven by the runways. This year it will hit 31.5 billion. Some of the first world problems for those with private jets is trying to get a slot to get out of Dublin Airport at the moment. So there is the economy we are in. It may be inconvenient. I'm not saying there are people who are not experiencing this, but the damage from this is being experienced if we don't actually harness the good parts that have come our way. Thank you.